All right, so now I've got 60 stitches on here, and now I'm going to join it for working in the round. What I did was, you can see I have markers every 10 stitches, and I alternated colors so I can easily count 20, 40, 60. The middle of that is going to be 30, so that's going to be right here. So by having my marker right in the middle, I can pull it and pull my stitches down, and now I have my knitting divided exactly in half for me to do the magic loop. Now, to join using the magic loop, you always have the working yarn on your back needle. So here's my working yarn, and in fact what I'm going to do, just so things don't get super confusing, I'm going to cut this pink now because I don't need it, and my working yarn is the green. All right, so my working yarn is always on the back needle, and the front needle is going to be the area where I'm going to start my knitting. To start this, I always make sure that I have my edge of the stitches facing in, and then I lift my front needle on top of my back needle so that they are side by side. And again, all of the ends, the bottom of my stitches are all facing in the same direction. I have the front needle so that the stitches are right at the tip of the needle. Then I pull the back needle out, and I make sure that my working yarn is between the two needles. Now the first thing I'm going to do, remember at the beginning I cast on an extra stitch? I'm going to take that extra stitch, slide it on my needle, and slide it right to the back needle. I'm not going to knit that extra stitch until I get around to the very end. So my working yarn is going to skip that first stitch that I moved and go right to this stitch. And now I'm just going to knit my pattern, which is basically knit one, purl one. So there's my knit one, and I'll do things both throwing and picking so that you can see how that works. So there's my throwing. Now I'll do some with the picking. The first two rows especially are especially fiddly. I always am greatly relieved when I get the first two rows done. Now I'm not using the yarn that we're using for the sweater, so it's not behaving the way your yarn will, but because your yarn is so thin, it's going to be if you use metal needles, it's going to be very slippery. I like having it slippery. I tend to knit loose, but once I get to the third round, this is so much easier. Now I'm not going to take my markers out until I finish this first round because I want to make sure that my count is right. So in between each marker, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I should have 10 stitches, and because I'm doing knit one, purl one, I should end each section with the purl. So let's see my next one. I'm going to split the pink. You can just fast forward through this. You don't need to watch me doing this. Actually, why don't I pause till I get to the end of this round, or the end of this. All right, so I just finished the rest of that, what was on that needle, those 30 stitches. They're now done. So now I'm ready to turn my needle so that I can do the second half. when you do the magic loop, then what I'm going to do is take the whole thing, make sure my ends, the bottom of the stitches are all facing in the same direction, and I'm going to turn it so the needles are pointing to the right. I'm going to take the front needle, and I don't need that marker there, and I'm going to slide it all the way down. So the front stitches are at the tip of the front needle. All right. Let me get these pink guys down here. And then I'm going to take make sure my working yarn is between the two needles, like that. And then I'm going to take the back needle and I'm going to pull it out and around so I can start knitting. So I end it with a purl. That means my first stitch on the next needle is going to be a knit. So I'm going to knit and purl to the end of this row. Well, actually you're going to knit and purl till you have 2 stitches left on this round. So I'll be back when I get there. All right, so I'm at the end of that second needle. And I've got this really loose stitch that I carried over from the beginning. That was my first stitch that I cast on. And I've got my last stitch that I cast on. And what I'm going to do is just purl those 2 together. And by purling those 2 together, what that does is it closes the gap that you would have by having the jog that you get when you knit in the round. Let me show you what I mean. Let me take this a minute. When you knit in the round, your knitting starts here and it goes around and it comes back. But when it comes back, you don't actually join. What you do is you go around. And what you're really doing is you're knitting in a spiral. So we keep track of where our beginning of our round is, so we know how we're counting. But if especially when you do color work, you can see this. You get a little bit of a jog here where the join is between where you start and where you stop each round. So there's various techniques for how to minimize that jog. And one of them is to take your first and last stitches that you cast on and knit them together. And what that does is it closes that gap that exists there. So that's the only reason we're doing that. If it's cumbersome or if it makes you confused or if you don't like doing it, you don't have to do it. It's just one of those odd little tips that makes your knitting look a little bit better once it's done. So the pattern that we're doing says repeat the knit 1, purl 1 for 10 rows. Then you're going to do an increase row where you just knit and increase. And then the next row after that is where you're going to knit, but you're going to also knit through the back loop of your increase. So I'll show you that. Not surprisingly, one of the first things I'm going to do is put in a scrap piece of yarn in my knitting right here. I'm going to use that for 2 purposes. 1, it's going to be my beginning of round marker, and 2, it's going to be my counter. So if we look at the sweater that I'm working on here, here's what my knitting so far. And you see this green thread in here. This green thread is marking the beginning of my round, but it's also marking every 4 rows. And the reason I have it marking every 4 rows is because our pattern is a 12-row repeat. So you do 10 rows of the rib, and then you do the 2 increase rows. So that's how I'm counting it. So if you look at what I have here, here's my 4, 8, 12, and then right here I've got 4, 8, and then I've got 2 more, which means the row I'm working on right now is my increase row. The easiest way to see, and I showed you this on the swatch one, the easiest way in here to count your stitches is to put a small needle between your stitches like this and count the ladders. That's the quickest, easiest, most accurate way I've found for me to count my stitches. I can easily put that in and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 6 rounds. If I try counting the stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it's, well, do I count this? Do I count? Where do I count? Counting the purl bumps is equally confusing because is this a purl bump or is this a purl bump? I mean, once you get used to it, you can tell where they are. But the easiest thing to do is to go right next to the bump for your knit and put this right up alongside that and then count. Now, let me spread this out so you can see what I'm doing. Right here. And then count the number of threads that you have on your needle. But rather than needing to do that all the time, I just have my counting thread going up, and so that I know what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do that. Now for this, okay, let me just stop there. So coming back to this now, I just finished that first round. I put my marking yarn in here, my counting yarn, and now I'm going to do the second round. So I've got my 2 needles lined up. The ends are facing down. Nothing's twisted. My front needle, the stitches are at the tip. The yarn is between the 2 needles. And so I'm going to pull the back needle out, loop it around, and I'm going to start knitting. All right, so I finished knitting that needle. So again, I'm going to hold the 2 needles together, turn them, push the front needle in so the tips of the stitches are at the front of or at the front tip of the, no, wait a minute. So the stitches are at the tip of the front needle. My yarn is between the 2 and I'm going to pull the back one out. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of is if you pull these apart while you're doing this, you're going to get these big loops separating these. So you'll notice the whole time I'm doing this, I'm keeping these 2 needles fairly close together. They don't have to be taut, but they're right next to each other. The other thing that happens that I do intentionally is when I start knitting, I kind of give this a little tug, and what that does is it tightens up the yarn around the cable, which means it's making this last stitch smaller than it should be. And that I'm doing that on purpose because this yarn going from the back needle to the front needle is going to be longer than it should be. So when I come around, I'm going to pull this excess into this stitch so that they're all about the same size. So I'm going to knit this to the end of this round and then we'll be back. All right, I just finished that. So I'm going to take the whole thing again, turn it, slide my front needle down so the stitches are at the tip. My working yarn is between the 2 needles, and I'm going to pull the back needle out. And because I'm where my counting thread is, I know I'm now about to start round 3. I can count my stitches, which is real nice because you have the pink, so you know what you're counting. This is the cast on. It's not a round. This first thing is the cast on. So I've done 2 rows. It's important that you see that. It's always one of those things where people miscount. This first thing here is my cast on. So there's my cast on. There's round 1. There's round 2. That's why when I put my counting thread in, I have it right here so that when we count these threads in between this, you see a thread for round 1 and the thread for round 2, but you're not counting this thread for your cast on. Okay? All right, one more quick tip about working the magic loop. And that is, remember how I said I pull this out and this stitch gets tight, but the ladder from the row before that might be a little bit looser than you want. So when I start knitting, if it's loose, I give it a little tug so that I pull that tighter and then I knit, and then maybe I'll even give the purl stitch a little tug, and then I'll go about knitting. Okay, that's it for the magic loop.